Let me tell you something you already know. The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It's a very mean and nasty place. I don't care how tough you are, it will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it. You, me, or nobody is going to hit as hard as life. Rocky Balboa, fictional character played by Sylvester Stallone. All right. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, then I want to especially thank you for giving me your time so early. All right. So I'm going to be discussing a fight today. I'm not going to play a clip of this fight. It was pretty brutal. But I will play a news clip about the fight and then I will describe it to you. Now, I want to tell you, and then I'm going to play a clip from Maj Toure. You may or may not know him. He is the founder of Black Guns Matter. He's an activist and part of the liberty sphere as well, libertarian up there in Philly. So, fair warning, I will be playing a clip from him. He uses a bit more coarse language than I do, at least while I'm on the show. Okay. So fair warning, if you have young kids present and you're like, hey, I don't really want you to listen to, coarse language, profanities and whatnot, then maybe you turn it off and listen at a later time or what have you. So, but that's your warning. I just want to let you know that, and we're going to be talking about some things today that are, a bit rough, in general, but it's a conversation that needs to be had. So, let's get right into it. Let's play this news clip and let's see what we've got going on. And then I'm going to kind of show you some things from Twitter, and then we'll dive into Maj's, at least part of it is he went live on Instagram. I believe it was yesterday, and it was like 30 minutes, but I've actually cut it down to about like 8 or so. That works for the purposes of this conversation. So at any rate, let's play that media clip and let's see what is going on with this story.
But first, the viral video of a vicious brawl that left a 15-year-old girl in critical condition. The fight that neighbors say is part of a decades-long trend.
The video is brutal and graphic, and now it's gone viral. Good evening, I'm Mike Bush. Another teen is in police custody after this fight near Hazelwood East High School. 5 on your side's Laura Barczewski talked with neighbors who say fights like this are actually nothing new for their block.
Mike, neighbors told me off camera for years, Hazelwood East students will take their problems off campus and into their neighborhood simply because they're so close to the school. St. Louis County Police say on Friday afternoon around 2:30, they were called out to break up a fight happening in the intersection of Norgate and Claudine Drive. A neighbor shared security camera footage of the fight, but wanted to remain anonymous for their own safety. In their video, you can see this large group of teens gather in the street. This is just moments before punches are thrown. There is also cell phone video from another angle that's gone viral on social media sites. On Twitter, St. Louis County Prosecutor Wesley Bell reposted it, saying his office has no jurisdiction because it's a juvenile court matter. It shows two girls fighting. You can see the first few frames here, but due to the graphic nature, will not be showing the full clip. Later in the video, one girl's head gets slammed into the ground. Police say that girl suffered a severe head injury and is still in the hospital. Neighbors say off-camera fights between Hazelwood East students have been happening on their street for years, and it's made them consider increasing security measures. The Urban League tries to help teens get away from lives of violence, but says a lot of neighborhoods are often resource deserts.
And when you have a lack of resources, then you can pretty much predict the outcomes. What you see, what we witness on that video is an example of what happens when individuals don't have nurturing environments in which they grow up in.
Their vice president of public safety, James Clark, says helping these teens is an uphill battle because of social media.
There is a new level of socially ill behaviors that become normalized on social media.
Clark says these bad examples are all over Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok.
And we know that our young people are literally caught up in a cesspool of negative behavior, where negative behavior is actually glamorized.
Police say on Saturday they arrested a 15-year-old girl who they believe is involved, and she's now facing assault charges. The Hazelwood School District posted a statement about the incident on Facebook, offering condolences to those involved. It reads in part, "Bullying and fighting in the community is an issue for which we all need to take ownership and work towards a resolution for the sake of our children." St. Louis County Police asked anyone with information to call 636-529-8210 to speak with investigators.
And nearly 50% of American schools have seen an increase in fighting, according to the National Center for Education Statistics. The Urban League says solutions will take a lot of listening to young people and those who need the most support.
Because the social pressure is to be socially dysfunctional. Who can be the loudest? Who can be the most disruptive? Too often we set programs based on what honor roll students want and what honor roll students need. We've got to be able to go deep into the bowels.
The league offers help to juvenile offenders through their Reroute program, which includes school visits, help in court, neighborhood engagement, and more.
All right. So, that last part kind of really struck a chord with me, where that gentleman was like, look, we create a lot of these programs based on like honor roll students, and we need to go a little bit deeper, and I actually agree with him. It really shouldn't be terribly surprising. I worked with teens, at-risk teens, for quite a while. And, one of the things that I have mentioned over the years is that there was a frustration that a lot of people that want to come and help, they seem to come and help with this mindset of, okay, well, they're coming with the honor roll student mindset, the kid that maybe where like chewing gum and maybe a simple, a simple fight is the big deal, right? And like this is a broader conversation. I don't want to get into it too much, but I did want to make a point. Like, he is correct. We need to look at this from a different lens, and that's kind of why I'm doing this, because initially, well, let me give you my initial response that I put out before there was before I saw a lot of my mutuals, in particular Maj, having conversations about this. So let me give you my initial comment that I had said. So there it is. Put it up on the screen. Let me set it up a little bit bigger so that I can see it. I said more thoughts on the brutal. No, I'm sorry, that's not it. That is the wrong one. That's why is it? Okay, let's go back here. Let's just go back here. All right, let's do that. There we go. All right, I guess I had set it up and had it left on the last one. All right, apologies for that. All right, so the first comment that I put out, I said people are rightfully horrified by this video. And I actually had retweeted the video since it was already viral on social media. But again, I'm not going to play that video here, and I'll tell you about it in just a second. But may I point out that this level of violence is not new. I went to high school in the 90s and saw this level of violence. And I did. It's true. Like, I actually went to a high school that had metal detectors in the 90s. So when people kind of like, how can there be so much violence in the schools? And I'm like, there wasn't always violence in the schools, because like that's what I experienced. In fact, true story. I was graduating 8th grade from a Catholic high school and preparing to enter Meadowdale High School in Dayton, Ohio for 9th grade. Now, Meadowdale is a public school and it happens to be predominantly Black. We're going to touch upon that in just a moment. The neighbor girl warned me fights are different here. They end up with puddles of blood and ambulances being called. That's literally what she said. Like, I will never forget. Like, there are some words that you just don't forget. And I did not forget those words. I don't know that I always took heed, but I at least remember those words. She wasn't wrong. As for those involved here, I probably wouldn't put up much of an argument if they were tried, convicted, and dropped off on a remote island. Might as well make room for immigrants who want to contribute to society. Now, that's me being a little bit on the spicy side. You can disregard that last statement of mine, because we want to focus on the fight itself and kind of like perceptions about the fight that we see going on around social media. So then, let me stop here. Let's stop here really quickly. And let me tell you, I'm going to describe what I recall of the fight. I saw it like a couple of days ago. So it's still relatively fresh in my mind. But I'm not going to play it because it is pretty brutal. So basically, you have a whole bunch of people. Most of them look like kids. In another news clip, apparently there might have been some adults there as well. But there were mostly teenagers, and the video picks up where there's a kind of already a lot of commotion going on, and there's two girls, a Black girl and a white girl, and they engage. And at one point, another girl, I think another Black girl, goes and starts hitting the first Black girl. So a second Black girl is hitting the first Black girl, and then a second white girl comes up and kind of assaults the second Black girl, and then they kind of move off out of the camera. And then the first white girl and the first Black girl continue fighting. Basically, the Black girl gets the drop on the white girl, and then it doesn't take but a few seconds before the Black girl is on top of the white girl, and then just literally takes her head and bashes it against the concrete. And you could hear it. This is one of the reasons why I'm not playing it. And then the video kind of pans all over the place, and you can kind of see a bit of commotion and fighting going on elsewhere with other people. So that's basically what ends up happening. It's just this big disarray of people that are fighting, and it certainly is a mixed crowd. So that was my initial response. And then after that, I started seeing more conversations about it. And then this is where kind of like Maj enters in, because I see Maj make a comment and then I responded to him. So let me put his comments up on the screen there for you so that you can see it. All right. So there we go. And he actually made several comments. So I'm kind of like just picking the comment as it makes sense to try to convey to you. I'm not going to try to put out all of these things that he said. But he's like, hey, if you walk into a group fight and agree to fight, do not expect the people you are fighting to not try to kill you. This fight between these group of girls was agreed upon, and there was a horrible injury and potential death. Gruesome outcome, but to be expected when you have high levels of anger and very little adults stopping it. This isn't about race. It's about what happens in a fight. Please stop the race-based corny talking points. Do people say corny anymore? I mean, I guess they do. I thought that was. I mean, Maj is a pretty cool guy, so he says corny. I mean, I guess it's still in fashion. I thought it was a bit old, but whatever. Anyway, you look just like a leftist loser doing so. All right, so then I chime in and I just made a comment back to him, and this is what I said in response. I said it isn't about race. On that, I agree. It's completely absurd that any kid agrees tacitly or explicitly to have their head slammed into the concrete until they have a seizure, potentially killing them or becoming a vegetable. At some point, we say these kids took it too damn far. And now Maj didn't respond to me. Now let me explain myself here, because I didn't really do a turnabout on this, but my initial, the way I perceived what he was saying, I have kind of changed my perspective just a wee bit after watching some more of his content come out, be it on Twitter or on Instagram, which we'll watch in just a moment. So initially, my thought was it came across to me, and I think it may have come across this way to other people, like, hey, they signed up for it, like, and I think there was some other comments like, hey, they squared up, and it was like, that's how the cookie crumbles, right? Like, this is what you signed up for. And so my initial thought was like, well, nobody's really signing up to have their head bashed in, which is weird because at the same time, I would also argue that if the white girl had gotten the drop on the black girl, she might have done the same thing, right? So even though you're not necessarily looking to have your head bashed in, you might be the person bashing somebody's head in. And I think this goes towards Maj's actual perspective of the whole thing, which I think ends up, which I end up saying, you know what, I think you're 100% correct on this. And I think what throws people off was some of the very strong language that he uses to describe this. Because I mean, if you think about it, in the video clip that I just played, the school put out, and they're like, well, fights and bullying is, a problem, blah, blah, and it sounds very calm and chill, like, like just fights and bullying. But this is more than a fight, and maybe we just don't have the words to properly describe it, right? Because this is something different than two people that happen to get in a fight, and we've seen these kind of fights where two people get in a fight, doesn't end up being brutal. Maybe somebody gets a bloody nose or a black eye. I've been in those kind of fights, right? Like, and that's like the simple fight. And when people think like, oh, teens fighting, that's no big deal. That's what they think about. And so when they see a video like what's going around, it actually is far surpasses what their expectations of a fight. However, maybe that's the problem. Maybe the problem is that we're still stuck in this nice place, this utopia where fights are always a bloody nose, or a black eye. And I've certainly been in some fights that I've never been in a fight that was quite that brutal. I've seen some of them that were pretty close to that brutal. Um, and I've heard about them, and I knew people that have been in them, so I've been pretty close to that level of violence, unfortunately. But I think maybe that's the problem. I think maybe the problem is that we have too nice of a version in our heads about fighting. And to the point of the man in the video clip from the organization that works with kids, where he said, we create these programs based on honor roll students. And I think that's part of the problem. Like, these aren't honor roll students. So many of these programs aren't useful. So let me stop and give you a quick story here just to kind of illustrate this in a different context. When I was in my 20s, I lived in Richmond, Indiana. It's a town of about 40,000 people. Or it was at the time. I don't know where it is now. But I worked at a church, and I worked with what we called the 11th Street kids. Now, there's this road called 11th Street, and there was a lot of poor families there, and just a lot of the things that you would see on the poor side of town. So there might be a little bit more violence, or more poverty, things like that, more drugs, being sold, and things that we may not otherwise wish to see. So, um, when once there was a time when all the leadership was in a meeting in the church. Now, this was like a middle class church, and then they had me deal with, like, spiked hair and a septum piercing and huge baggy pants. I mean, I totally rocked the skater look, the very traditional skater look, if you will, from the 90s. And and I was familiar with running on the streets, right? So I wanted to be a youth director to work with kids and to help bring them to a better life so that they could, go on and have a productive life that didn't involve jail or, other hardships along that line. And so I'm somewhat out of my element, except for the fact that, I had run the streets a little bit myself. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to present myself as like some kind of hardcore gangbanger or anything like that. I'm just simply somebody that did hang out with the wrong crowd, and and went to some neighborhoods that I really didn't belong in. And I've had some experiences that hopefully none of you will have, nor your children, or mine for that matter. And so there I am, this is who I am. I'm a little bit more familiar with with kids that are coming in from the wrong side of town, if you will, the wrong side of the tracks. And we're in this leadership meeting talking about just different things for the, leadership in the church. And a woman raises her hand and she said, well, when kids are like 15, don't they just know how to behave in church? And I just sat back in the back. I was like way in the back, and I just was like, I started shaking my head. I was like, no, like this is like that, and this is part of the problem, right? I think people have this pleasant view of what a fight is, right? We've watched Rocky Balboa, and it doesn't seem so bad. He seemed all right, although maybe some of you forgot that Creed didn't make it. So fights can be brutal, and especially on the street, they can be very brutal. So on one hand, yes, I am correct. People aren't signing up to have their head bashed in, but you also don't get a choice in what you're signing up for exactly, because there aren't rules and there isn't a referee that's guaranteed to sit there and stop it if it gets out of control, right? It may get out of control and maybe somebody breaks it up and maybe somebody doesn't, or maybe somebody breaks it up, but it's too late. Okay. So that's what's going on in this fight, and that's kind of a little bit of a story to kind of help set the tone for, we need to think about these things differently. And as you'll see, Maj Toure starts using I don't want to say his whole name, but Maj starts using terms like mutual combat, which sounds a bit weird at first because you're like, mutual combat? Like, dude, this isn't Gladiator, man. But then again, the video kind of looks a lot more like Gladiator than we may be willing to admit. And if we want to deal with violence, then maybe we need to up how we think about violence in the way that we talk about violence. And rather than say things like fighting and bullying to describe something that put a 15-year-old girl into a hospital, where somebody was on their phone recording it from feet away, several feet away, with people yelling and screaming and making all kind of noise, and you could still hear the head hit the pavement. Maybe we need to start talking about this in those terms and say, even if you're 15, it's mutual combat, because if you're lucky, you might get away with a bloody nose or, some bruises or something like that. Rather than thinking of that fight as like the standard and then everything else is the exception, maybe it needs to be the other way around. We need to start thinking of it in terms of somebody's head's getting smashed on a concrete, and that is how we perceive a fight. And anything less is luck. You lucked out with who you found, because again, this is a street fight. There aren't rules, there aren't referees. I mean, I've been in fights where I've been in both. I've been in fights where there were no referees and things happened as they did. And I've been in fights where there were kind of referees, right? Like I'll give you another story. That same Catholic school, because by the way, I went to a nice Catholic school where, everybody, all the kids kind of had at least enough money to get into the school, right? They still got in fights, and they weren't as brutal, but they got in fights. And I remember I went to a fight where two kids were going to fight. I don't remember what they were fighting about or whatever, but this was back in this. Give me a second, let me cough. So sorry about that. So this was back in the day when it was like, I'll meet you at the playground at 3 o'clock or some, given place, right? I'll meet you at the park. Well, we met at the park a lot. That was one of the places where we would meet when we wanted to settle our differences. And two guys wanted to get in a fight. And some of the older kids, they uh they showed up and they started patting down the two kids that wanted to fight. And it was funny because at the time, my friend and I were really into like ninjutsu and stuff like that. So we were always making weapons and had like Chinese stars and nunchucks and all this stuff on us. And we would practice with them regularly, just more out of fun, not because we were like badass per se. And so one of the kids was like, no, Daniel over there is the one that's always got weapons. And they came and they patted me. I wasn't even, and I was like, I'm not even in the fight. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, they patted me down, right? That was the nice version, right? Those, and I don't recall exactly how the fight turned out, but I can pretty much tell you that it didn't, like, there was no need for an ambulance. Nobody needed to go to the hospital, right? Like, you went home, you took your licks, and you put some ice on your eye or something like that, right? Like, that was the nice version of a fight. But then when I graduated, and as I pointed out, when my friend told me, like, hey, when you go to Meadowdale, they call the ambulance on a regular basis. There are puddles of blood, and this was in high school, right, in the 90s, right? So that's where we are, right? This is, and so I think that there's a conversation to be had here. So I need to hurry it up a little bit because the clip from Maj is about 8 minutes. And I think it's a very valuable clip, and it's worthwhile watching the whole thing. But I don't want to play his whole clip because it's like 30 minutes, and I think that's a little bit rude. And then also, it's also 30 minutes. So so I'll just play the clip that I think is relevant. But before that, let me finish up with some of these Twitter comments that I had made, because there's a couple more. So this is the one where I'm like, hey, it's not about race. And now this is, at this point, what I'm disagreeing with is this potential idea that I think is, oh, people sign up to, to have their head bashed in, which is not really where Maj was going. And so this was my only disagreement with him. And so then after that, I see a post from Maj, and he's like, hey, grown men not understanding the concept of what can potentially happen in a street fight, actually saying no one should expect to die in a fight, as if everyone has the same moral compass or awareness in a fight, win or lose. As if me saying expect your ops to try to kill you is the same as me saying what the teenager did is okay. Morons. But you know what else helps me see? Which ones of you haven't been in a fight before for sure? So many weak men, disgusting. And he's correct here, right? Like, think, like, I've been in some of these fights. I've seen some of these fights. I know how brutal it can get. I remember I used to ride the city transit, and there was a white girl and a black girl that were, they were in conflict, yelling and screaming. And at one point, one of the girls, I, I think if I remember correctly, I was sitting in this seat, and then not behind me, but to my right. um, the white girl was sitting there, and then the black girl reached over me and smacked the white girl, and I was like, "Hey!" And then she was like, "I'm sorry." And then I moved over, because clearly you don't want to be in the way of two people fighting. And then the white girl got off the bus, and she actually got off early. And then the black girl and a couple of her friends got off the bus like the very next stop. And we all knew what was going to happen. And the next day, the white girl had a bunch of bruises on her face. Right. So clearly they had it out, and the girl lost. Like, so, and that was, from what I can remember, that was again a lucky version of the fight. Right. And again, and this is not a race thing. Like, I've seen plenty of white dudes pummel black dudes, right? Like, I've seen it from both sides. So people, Maj, he goes into, like, okay, well, it's not really a race thing, and I agree, because I've seen both sides of this, and I've seen the violence that can happen. Um, and there is no, like, oh, black violence, because I'm like, okay, well, I've seen white violence. Okay, so why don't we just scrap the colors and call it violence? All right. So then I made this final comment. Um, and here's what I said. All right, pull that up. Sorry, I'm moving screens around a little bit. I said more thoughts on the brutal fight going around because black people are involved does not make it about race. And I think that's something that we need to keep in mind. Like, it's very convenient to look at videos and be like, uh-huh, it's the black people again. But that's actually not accurate. You're just not seeing the fights from white people. But they do happen. I've watched them. I've been literally in their presence, and I've participated in some of them. So they do happen. And I'm not going to tell you any more stories because, if I keep telling you stories, you might be like, DL, you said you weren't a gangbanger, but it sounded like you were trying to be. because I've been in a lot of fights, and some of them were like they were just all over the place. Some were nicer, some were less nice. Anyway, because black people involved does not make it about race. The white girl who had her head bashed might have done the same had she had the chance. I think a lot of people are forgetting this. It just so happened that in that video, the black girl had the upper hand, so she was able to inflict the most damage. But people aren't thinking like what happened, what would have happened if the white girl had the upper hand? Would she have engaged in that same level of violence? It's very possible. A child, teens included, can no more consent to medical gender transition than they can a brutal fight that leaves them convulsing. So I say this only so that we start recognizing like the fights are so brutal, or they can be, that we need to start thinking in terms that teens cannot consent, right? Like it used to be in my mind, like if two dudes wanted to fight it out, slug it out, punch each other in the stomach, get a couple face punches in, a black eye, a bloody nose, like, hey, cool, no big deal, right? Like, it's consent. But the truth is, so long as we have that idea, we are perpetuating a stronger level of violence because there isn't there isn't an area where we can say like this is where you stop, right? Like that gets lost in a sense because there aren't rules that everybody's following. And as Maj said a moment ago, there isn't a moral compass that everybody's on the same page, right? And this is why I chose that Rocky comment, because if you remember, and I mentioned Apollo Creed a moment ago, Rocky Balboa, and this is fictional, but it's still kind of represents reality a little bit. Rocky signs up to be a fighter, to get punched in the face repeatedly. So did Apollo Creed. So did Drago. Was it Rocky 3? And but but what ends up happening is in this one, Drago in that, and I was thinking it was Rocky 3. Yeah, Drago is much more violent, and he just beats Apollo until Apollo dies, right? And so, like, think about that. Like, it's possible that even in a boxing match with rules and a referee, that one person can have a little bit less concern for the violence inflicted on another person, right? Like if we're thinking in terms of, I didn't watch boxing, so I can't use a real example, so I have to use fictional ones. But just think about it. Like even in a ring, your opponent may want to hurt you more than you want to hurt them. So how much more can you expect that on the street where there's not agreed upon rules? There's not a referee that's trying to enforce those agreed upon rules, right? It is literally a free for all. So this is why I'm starting to come around to this idea like maybe it's actually even a bad idea to even say like, you know what? Sometimes boys get in a fight. Like no, we shouldn't tolerate that because as long as we tolerate that without any kind of construct to keep people within some sort of boundary, then we're contributing to the greater violence that we're seeing. We just don't like it. All right, I continue on. It's normal for a father to see that video and think violent thoughts with the words, if that were my child. I saw a few people online, they were like, look, if that were my child, I'm killing all of them. Now, I don't think it's prudent to say those sort of things. Okay. I just think it's a bad idea to put those kind of things in print. And it doesn't matter whether you're just the tough internet guy or whether you're the guy that actually means it. I just don't think it's a good idea to put it in print. And I saw some other people, they were like horrified. They're like, oh, I can't believe you would say that. Like, really? Like if that were my daughter, I would want vengeance. I would. Okay. Just so I think it's normal. Um, Everyone should wince at that video because it actually happened to a real person, someone's child. And I went like I've seen that level of violence up front and personal, like within arm's reach almost. Right. I've seen that kind of violence and it still made me wince. And hopefully it did you too. And if it didn't, then maybe you need to exit the conversation and figure out what in the world's going on with you. because this was not a fictional version, of a fight like Rocky Balboa, where you can watch it and know that they actually, that everybody actually didn't die. Like, no, this child may actually die. I don't know. I don't know her condition because she's 15 or around there. And so they're going to release a very limited amount of details. All right. So teens get into fights. That itself is normal. This is where I start to question my own self, right? Teens get into fights. That in itself is normal. Gladiator level violence is not normal, nor should we consider it so. And so now I'm actually rethinking all of that and saying, you know what? Maybe it's actually a bad idea to even say, a regular fight is normal. I mean, in a sense it is, but maybe as a society, we need to pull away from that, because allowing that without any kind of boundary for any further violence basically sets the stage for further violence. All right, we're getting kind of late. I want to play this clip from Maj Toure. So again, everything's going to be in the show notes. You should go watch the whole thing, but I'm going to play it. I may chime in, a time or two, but mostly I'm just going to let it play out. All right, so here we go.
If you're on my Twitter page, you guys can see what I'm having the discussion about as it relates to this fight. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you have seen this fight as it relates to the young lady that got her skull crushed and beat in. That was in a fight. Okay. There's several things here. We're watching a bunch of people on the right do the same race bait shit that the left does. And it's actually, at this point, it's just disgusting. It's just 100% disgusting. Y'all sound like the softest. I'm watching y'all complain about a tomboy that fishes and helps her dad in his construction business. I've watched y'all complain and whine. I'm talking about more specifically people on the right. What's up, Bearded Cyclops? Right? I'm watching y'all whine about, I'm seeing so-called conservatives whine about this young lady that has an accent. I'm hearing y'all whine about the group of white girls that was dancing. I'm hearing y'all whine about fucking everything. You bitches, you're disgusting. And now I've been off of Instagram for a little bit, been kicking it on Twitter, and now we see this fight between this young lady. First and foremost, I just created some content on this, but I wanted to jump in here on the live to ask y'all some questions. Answer some questions about this to you all, what my perspective on this is. Because if you are in our Telegram group, you probably got access to one of the classes, the Understanding Imminent Threat, the Firearms Basic 101, or the Civics class. You probably got access to that class for free. And we literally were just going about this. All right. If you haven't taken the class, you should get one. You should be in a Telegram group. If you want to support, the class is only $20 online. But my point here, guys, is we talked about this. In our classes, we talk about avoidance. So I want to jump on a few topics as it relates to this fight. If you aren't aware, I'll give you a quick backstory. Group of teenagers agrees to get up together to fight. Agrees. Mutual combat. Agrees to mutual combat. Teenagers are stupid. So teenagers do things like this, which is the opposite of why I brought up the classrooms, which is the opposite of what we teach in all of our classes. We deal with Eyes of Beauty said the education is dope. Join the email list. Good content. FYI. Okay. In our classes, we teach about avoidance. And if we can't avoid it, we de-escalate it. If we can't de-escalate, if unfortunately we got to engage, we engage and we get out of there.
All right. So let me pause here real quick because I made a comment to somebody else very similar to this. So when I took martial arts as a teenager, it was a bit corny, but as we illustrated earlier, Maj has said the word corny. So therefore it is totally in play. And so this phrasing was a bit corny, but it was the ABCs of violence. And it's the same thing that he just said. You avoid, you back away, which is basically think de-escalation, and then you conquer. Right. And so that's what we learned in martial arts. And I think it's always good to heavily focus on the A part, because once you leave A, things change rapidly. Right? Like you start losing, like you have the most control at A, at avoiding conflict. Once you've confronted with it, like if in the description might be like, I'm walking down the street and I see some guys, and they look like they might be kind of trouble, not because they black, but because maybe they're doing things, and being loud and boisterous and, flipping people off or whatever, maybe their actions, their behaviors are suggesting like, maybe I want to move to the other side of the street. So I try to avoid them, or maybe I, turn down a different road or something like that, right? So the idea being you avoid it, because if I get close enough to where I need to start doing B, which is back away, or you might think of it more like de-escalation. That's if, again, if I can de-escalate it. I might not be able to. Some people are just looking for trouble. And then so I'm losing control very quickly. And then the C, which is conquer, well, that's again if you are in a position to be able to do that. If there's like 4 dudes and it's just me, and like I'm probably gonna lose. Chances are, like that's like more than likely I'm losing right at that point. And I could lose if it's one person. Okay, so I think it's very important to keep that in mind. So avoidance, de-escalation, and then I can't remember the word that he used especially, but but get on it and then get out. Right, like I think that's very, very critical. So let's keep going.
Okay. These group of young people decided to square up, decided to meet together to have a fight. And one of the young ladies, who happened, based on what I see, she looks white. She may not be white. She might be Spanish. I don't know her. Okay. She squares up with a girl that's bigger than her. They start tussling. The girl gets the best of her and starts to slam her head on the ground. Junior Ward says, been trying to donate 100, but the link don't work. DM me after this and I'll make sure I send it to you, bro. Slams her head on the ground. The girl goes into a convulsion and is seizing. Ironically, the girl that did that to her, she got up and started fighting other people. As other people tried to hit her when she was on top of the girl punching her, she got up. The girl was seizing on the ground. She didn't hit her anymore. Now, that young lady is going to 100% be held accountable for her actions. I believe that young girl went too far in the middle of a fight. I also understand what happens with cortisol dumps, with adrenaline when you're in a fight. Okay? So I understand that. So all of you motherfuckers talking about, oh, they're savages. Oh, they're such a. Man, I got 50 videos of white people getting in fights, and I'm talking to you racists on the right.
All right, so let me pause it right here because I want to do something really quickly. I'm gonna do this so that you can see, and hopefully I don't mess up the video. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. All right. So as you can see, I've got my face as close as I can up to Maj. He's black. I am not. Now I'm not quite white either. So when he says he's got 50 videos, like if anybody had taken videos of me when I was a kid, that would have been one of those videos in his collection, right? Of somebody who's a lot lighter skinned, than him. So this idea that, all right, put that back now. That's a little weird. So this idea that it's, savages, black people. I've talked about this before. Let me make a very quick point. We'll continue listening to him. A lot of people will watch libs of TikTok and then they freak out and they're like, oh my God, every teacher is trying to groom my child. But every teacher isn't trying to groom your child, because what libs of TikTok is, that is showing you the teachers that are trying to groom your child. So if you watch that and that becomes your context for what teachers are like, you are going to have a distorted context. If you watch videos of it and the videos that you happen to see are only of black people fighting and maybe even winning, then you might get this false perception that, man, black people are violent. But the truth is, there are a lot of violent white people out there. I have met them. I have participated in some of the fighting with them, right? They are there. Our jails are full of them. Okay. So he is correct that a lot of people are kind of making this about race when they ought not be, because again, these girls chose to fight. Like they stepped up to fight. Now, whether or not they were, they could understand the full ramifications of what they were getting into is another story. And I think that's part of the reason that we should have this kind of a conversation. All right, so let's continue on.
Okay, you guys wait for opportunities like this to say, oh, it's a savage, or they jumped that white girl, or no one helped defend the white girl. It's a fucking fight. Guys, I said something about this on Twitter, and people were like, no, man, no one should expect to be killed in a fight. That's what you should 100% expect to happen in a gunfight, in a knife fight, I'm not getting in no fight.
All right. Pause it right there. Man, I paused it pretty well. He doesn't have a weird look on his face. Okay. You should expect that. Now, what I think is appropriate, and we can make the distinction maybe, is to recognize that people aren't going into a fight with the idea in mind that their head may be bashed against the concrete. But maybe you should, right? Like, rather than think it's going to be a simple fight. And I mentioned this a moment ago, like maybe the thinking of, oh, this will just be a fight. We'll all go home and, we'll talk about it tomorrow and I'll deal with the scrapes and the bruises. No big deal. Maybe we need to start really communicating and saying, like, look, every single fight is a potential, is an emergency ambulance call waiting to happen, right? Every single fight is a potential you get left in a vegetative state. Every single fight is potentially you die, right? And it doesn't always have to be, one person, having more extreme willingness towards violence than the other. It could simply be, hey, I punched this person, they fell back and hit their head on the concrete, right? I wasn't trying to kill them, but that's kind of what happens, right? Like, fights are unregulated and they happen quick. And once they start, you don't really have control of the outcome so much, right? Like, if you do, it's really luck on your side, or maybe it's more supervised or something like that. But I would say those are probably out of the ordinary. All right, let's continue listening.
Okay. So these guys are saying this because they want to defend their narrative. First of all, the white girl agreed to mutual combat and came to a location. First disagreement. First wrong move. Okay. 2, she got beat up. 3, the black girl went too far in the middle of all of that. Fight, do all of that, right? More people die from hands and feet than guns annually. When you take out the 60% of suicides, okay? When you take out that 60%, more people die from hands and feet getting beat to death. In one of our videos that we
So on the pause here, I've not looked up this particular statistic. Sorry about the face capture on that one, but I'm not familiar with the statistic on hand violence. But here's what I will say. When I went to school and when I went to public schools, a lot of kids got in a lot of fights and some of them got sent to the hospital. Okay. So, I didn't really see too many gun violence fights, or I guess you would call it a fight. I didn't see a lot of gun violence per se, but I did see a lot of fights. So at least from my experience, I would say that there was a whole heck of a lot more fights that ended up putting somebody in the hospital than I ever remember guns that put somebody in the hospital, or knives, or any other kind of deadly weapon like that. Right. So I even if even if the stat is not wrong, even if the stat is wrong, which I'm inclined to believe it is correct. I'm inclined to believe that it's correct. If nothing else, then there is a huge percentage of people that end up in a very serious, like a coma, death, hospitalized from regular fights. They can be that deadly. And I think we need to keep that in mind when we're having conversations about fights. Fights can turn deadly, period. All right.
Showing an understanding imminent threat class. We show a video of a Patriots fan at the Patriots Stadium, Gillette Stadium, get the shit punched into him and he dies in the stadium. More people die from that. So we talk 1000% about avoidance and de-escalation. This is not what happened here. But the people on the right, the Ian Miles Chung, all of these other fucking goofballs, want to act like it's about race. Now, let's jump back into the race. Some people will say, oh, no one helped the white girl. It was one-on-one. The white girl got knocked the fuck out, unfortunately. She gets knocked out and nobody jumped on the white girl. Actually, the black girl that was hitting the white girl got hit from the back for a while by someone else that happened to also be black. And then that's how the other people got involved and it came into a group melee. Guys, first of all, don't get in a fucking fight. Don't.
If you don't take away anything else, take away that. Don't get into a fight. And if you're a parent, communicate that to your child. Do not get into a fight. Do everything you can to avoid physical altercation with somebody else. Because the moment it starts, you don't have control. Period. So if you disagree with everything else that Maj and I are saying, that should be the one takeaway that you get, and the one thing that we communicate to everybody is do not get into a fight because you don't have control. You might think you do, and you're wrong.
I'm too handsome, too smart, too valuable to the world to risk. I don't get on roller coasters. Okay? I want y'all to understand this. I don't get on roller coasters. If you going to me and you like, let's go to Six Flags, I'll hold the bags. I'll be security. Everybody get beers. Everybody have a great time. I'm paying attention. I am the designated driver. I'm not getting on a motherfucking roller coaster. Why? Because if something goes wrong on that roller coaster, that's an unnecessary risk that I just don't want to participate in. I'm on planes all the time. That's enough of the risk for me. Okay? I'm not interested. When I ride dirt bikes, I'm in Arizona in dust. I know how to ride dirt bikes. I do not ride dirt bikes in fucking Philly traffic. I'm not doing it. It's an unnecessary risk. I do not get in fights. I'm not. If you try to put my life in imminent danger, I'm going to fucking shoot you. That's it. I'm going to clear garments and I'm going to stop the threat.
All right. So I think this is the message that we need to send to people. And I think this is also a conversation for the liberty community, is that we need to say, like, look, we're not getting into a fight. We're going to do everything we can to avoid it. Right. Because, and let me put it into context here. Right. Maj is a bigger guy than I am. Okay. And I mean, he looks bigger on the screen, but he's also actually bigger in real life. I've met him in person. And I'm 120 pounds and I'm 5'3". Here's the point. I'm not going to suggest that I could beat up Maj, but what I'm saying is that Maj doesn't know me. He's never gotten in a fight with me. So if he were to get in a fight with me, he might find that I'm a better fighter and I could get the upper hand and I could be crazy and I could do the same thing that the girl did. Right. Apologies that coughing. Still got a dry cough from being sick. And I'm not suggesting that this is not me trying to be like, oh, talk smack behind, while Maj isn't looking or anything. What this is saying is he doesn't get in a fight because he doesn't know what the outcome will be. And it's the same reason that he doesn't, he minimizes, I guess, his air travel, and then he doesn't get on roller coasters because he's like, look, I'm trying to limit my risk, not add more to it. Getting in a fight with anybody is adding risk, even if it's somebody like me, who's a smaller guy, right? Because he doesn't know what my particular capability is in a fight, nor does he know where I'm willing to take a fight, right? So the best thing to do is to avoid it altogether. And I think that's that's the message that we absolutely need to send, is avoid these fights. Right? It doesn't matter who it is. Doesn't matter if you think they're a smaller guy and you can take them, or hey, the bigger they are, the bigger they fall. Look, like some of those sayings, they're nice and cute, but at the end of the day, they ain't gonna save you. All right, let's finish this up because my producer just showed up. He's looking kind of hungry. You
but
hungry?
When we talk about fighting,
all right,
and we got to understand that's what fights are. Fights are brutal. See, the unfortunate part for these race baiters on the right, the so-called fake woke right, the unfortunate part for their argument is they're trying to hide their bigotry behind these situations, and people like me come through and go, that's bullshit. That white girl didn't get jumped. She agreed to be a part of that shit. She got her ass beat, and now she fucked up, and that's fucked up. But let's call that what that is. Where were the fucking fathers? Where were the fathers? Where was that white girl's father? Where was those black people's father? There was other adults that were involved. Where were all of the fucking parents? That's a conversation to have. There's a conversation to have around conflict resolution and de-escalation. There's a conversation to have around, do you, like grown men thinking that somehow a fight is going to be like everyone shares the same moral compass. These are the same people that will say, if someone's coming at me with a knife, that I'm not supposed to clear my garment and shoot the shit out of that person. He only had a knife. Are you out of your fucking mind? For anybody that took the Understanding Imminent Threat class, I want y'all to chime in. Remember that video in the class where we go over with that couple that came from that engagement party, and that one crazy kid had a knife and he sliced the dude's throat and the dude bled to death right there? I'm not giving you no fucking up on me. These are the same people that say, well, he just had a knife. Why didn't you? Well, you didn't have to shoot him. The fuck I didn't.
All right. So that's the end of the clip. Go and look in the show notes. You can go and watch the full clip over on Instagram. I encourage you to do that. So the reason I wanted to have this conversation is because I think we need to change how we view fights. We need to stop viewing fights as like, oh, you know what? You got in a fight, you got a bloody nose, no big deal, because they can turn serious. And we want to make sure that we keep our kids, our friends, our family, ourselves out of serious situations. Number two, I think there's something to be said about the race baiting that we see. And here is that something. So long as we're talking about this race who supposedly is more violent than another race, we're not having conversations about where was the parent? Where were the parents? Why didn't the dad teach them, how to handle themselves better, which includes avoiding fights in the first place, which includes learning how to de-escalate a situation. Where were they at? Where are people that, where are people that might be able to help and provide resources for the organizations that are out there, right? Because at the end of the day, some of these kids, they don't have a dad. And so on one hand, yes, it's a good thing to say, where were the fathers? On the other hand, some of them don't have them. So where's the community providing resources to help out and say, all right, look, you don't have a dad. That's a terrible thing. We're going to deal with that man for not being a dad. But at the same time, we need to recognize that you still need help, right? And we don't want you to end up in a viral video and then in, a vegetative state, convulsing on the ground. We don't want that. So we're going to try to have these conversations. We're basically going to chew gum and walk at the same time. We're going to say, men, man up. If you have a child, you need to be a father. End of story. And we should ridicule men that don't do that. And then at the same time, simultaneously, we need to say, all right, for the kids who have fathers that won't man up, then what we're going to do is we're going to help you out. And we're going to do our best to teach you the things that your dad should have taught you, but didn't, right? So this is talking, or I'm chewing gum and walking at the same time. I think I said chewing gum and talking a moment ago, didn't I? I think I did. But anyway, so this is the conversation that we need to have. And while we're having these bogus conversations about, the violent Black community and, savages and all these other terms that people, we need to reject them and say, you are just trying to farm for engagement and we're rejecting it. Because by rejecting it, we can shift the conversation back to where it needs to be, which is talking about violence is not a good thing. We need to do our best to avoid it. We need to learn how to de-escalate it. And then if we absolutely must, we need to figure out, we need to teach ourselves and our sons and our daughters and everyone else how to defend ourselves when we can't avoid or de-escalate, and then get the heck out, just like Maj said. Right. So that's my show for today. Let me, there was a comment that I saw and I do want to address it really quickly. So let's see, where is it here? Yes. So this comes from Brian Fleming. Do you think a school/institution should allow boxing with supervision while there still is a chance of injury? It's a lot less. That's a tough one. So let me tell you a quick story. I was in the Boys and Girls Club when I was in like junior high area, and I went to a camp for a week. And what they did was they separated the girls and the boys, and they had a camp counselor we all had like a little cabin of like somewhere between 6 and 8 boys. And then the girls had their cabins way far away, 6 to 8 girls. And then each cabin had a counselor, and, they had men with boys and they had women with girls. And I remember there was two guys that were beefing about something. And our counselor did something that was pretty interesting. He cleared away everything out of the middle of the porch patio. There's like a little screened in porch patio. And he told the two guys to go in there and duke it out. And they fist fight, simple fist fight, simple kind. And then once it was clear they were done, he broke it up. And then he told him, he said, "Look, you won, you lost. That's it. That's the end of it. I don't want to see any more." And I don't think they did. The question is, should we do that? I'm not really sure. Maybe, if there is beef, we say, "All right, you got beef, you go here. Otherwise, we're not tolerating it." And the reason I say that maybe is because um, I do believe that as you are growing up, sometimes uh, you are not in a position, you do not have the skill set to do much more than fighting. On the other hand, if you don't have the skill set, maybe you need to acquire it. Because, the question that I have to ask myself, while that particular story turned out okay, right? Like there was no further violence and they didn't seem to have any beef after that. What happened the weeks after and the months after and the years after? Did either one of those two guys go on thinking, yep, violence is a good way to solve a dispute? They might have, right? And who knows what happened to them? Maybe they turned out just fine and they're living a nice, cushy life. They're nice, well-adjusted adults, or maybe one or both of them are in jail for having committed a violent crime. I don't really know. So I see the question. I get it. I think there's a conversation to be had. I'm inclined to say no because I would rather teach avoidance and de-escalation. The ABCs: avoid, back away, however you want to talk about it, right? I would rather teach that. My producer, who I'm getting ready to go and make breakfast for, that's what I'll be teaching him. Son, stay away from fights. They're no good. If you win, you probably still didn't win, right? It's very rare that a situation turns out positive, such as, and let me throw another comment up on the screen here. This comes from Keith Garrett. He says, "It's just my opinion. Sometimes fights lead to mutual respect or even friendships." And that is true. Um, I actually got into a fight with a kid when I was in like seventh grade at the Catholic high school. We met at the same park, and then we got in a fight. He totally whooped me completely, and then the teachers. The reason that we ended up becoming friends is actually not so much because of the fight per se, but because of how the teachers handled it. Now, it was off school property, but the teachers, they were like, "Well, we don't care." They said, "You two now have a project to work together for science class. And if you don't do it well, you're flunking." Because they basically shifted and said, "All right, this project is now a good portion of your grade, and you can either complete it and work together, or you can fail." That was our choice. And we chose to work together. We ended up actually becoming really, really good friends. But again, the better opportunity, the better situation would have been that we didn't get in a fight at all, and that we would have de-escalated the situation, right? From whatever conflict that we were having. That would have been the even better outcome, right? So yeah, it did turn out that way. But then also, I want to say, I've been in a lot more fights, and I didn't become friends with them. So I think it's an anomaly when somebody becomes a friend, and we shouldn't rely on that. We should not rely on the idea that you might become friends or that you might settle the dispute any more than we rely on the idea that we can control how a fight plays out, because we can't. And if it ends up with just a black eye or bloody nose, I think the takeaway here is you got lucky, and that needs to be the conversation. And then we need to shift our conversations so that we can improve society. Yapping about which race is worst or worse, is that doesn't do it. That doesn't edify our communities. That doesn't improve them for anyone. It might make great. It might make for great. You know, uh, it might make you get some money from the engagement you get on social media, but it stops there. So I agree with Maj, the Ian Miles Chong guy, and others who were race baiting. They can go to heck. All right, folks. That is my show. I hope that you enjoyed it. I thank you for watching. Hope you found it informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern, for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you are subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer, my Rumble channel. You can go to youtube.libertydad.com or rumble.libertydad.com. While you're there, if you know, make a comment, let me know how I'm doing. I do like to read the comments even after the fact. Remember, last but not least, if you are a champion of people, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. But for now,